News Congress Conversation, presented by Cars Commerce. I'm Hannah Lutz, Director of Technology and Innovation Coverage at Automotive News, coming to you from our studio in Detroit. Automotive News supplier reporter John Irwin joins me in the studio today. Hi, John.
Hi, Hannah.
Today we'll discuss how new trade policy will impact auto retail. Let's welcome our panelists. Mike Maroone, CEO of Maroone USA, with 7 dealerships in Colorado and 1 in Florida. Hi, Mike.
Hey, Hannah.
Don Hall, President and CEO of the Virginia Auto Dealers Association. Hi, Don.
Hannah, how are you?
Good. And Inga Maurer, Senior Partner at McKinsey and Company. Hello, Inga.
Hey, Hannah. Hey, John. Such a pleasure being here.
And Brian Kramer, Executive Vice President of Dealer Growth and Success at Cars Commerce. Thanks to all of you for joining us today. We want the audience.
Thanks for having us.
We want the audience to be a big part of the conversation. So say hi in the chat and tell us where you're watching. We really want to know all of your questions, so please put them in the comments and we will answer as many as we can during this live stream. Let's begin with a quick tariff breakdown. The Trump administration has implemented a series of tariffs over the last few months. For the auto industry, this means 25% levies on imported vehicles and a wide range of automotive parts. The administration has offered some concessions to the auto industry, like partial tariff reimbursement on parts that go into U.S.-built vehicles for 2 years, and vehicles from Canada and Mexico that comply with the terms of the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement are taxed only on the value of their non-U.S. content. And the government is also allowing importers of vehicles from the UK to pay only a 10% tariff on the first 100,000 vehicles, rather than a 25% tariff. So that is a very high-level summary of the tariff situation for the auto industry. You can find more details and frequent updates at autonews.com. Okay, so now that we've set the tariff stage, let's get into the retail impact. Don, you recently surveyed your dealers on the tariff impact. What did you learn?
Well, it was interesting, somewhat predictable probably, and that is that no matter what things are thrown at our industry, we always land on our feet and we make that lemon into wonderful tasting lemonade. And so with the tariffs, I think the biggest thing is it's the unpredictability I think that dealers think about, but at the same time, they're used to that and they survive well through that. But I think the average dealer in Virginia, at least, made it very clear that they wish they had a better idea. But having said that, let's keep our focus. Let's sell new and used cars. And more importantly, let's repair all and any cars we can repair. And I think that's the general attitude of the Virginia dealers, regardless of what is happening literally down the road here in Virginia, outside of Virginia and Washington, D.C.
Mike, how do you expect tariffs to impact dealerships' inventory levels and vehicle allocations?
I think that the inventories today are adequate. It's tomorrow that we worry about. Our allocations over the last 6 or 7 weeks have been about a 50% level, and that's an aggregated number across several brands. So our real concern, John, comes in late June and then in July and August, where we think we'll be very short of product and are already taking steps to address that.
And anyone, please jump in if you have anything to add. Have you, Inga, Brian, seen anything at the inventory or allocation level?
Well, I've seen a lot of dealers. Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Inga.
No, go ahead, Brian, please.
I've seen a lot of dealers that are going back to really fully understand their allocation methodologies and try to figure out, they kind of maybe during COVID took their hand off the wheel because everything was on autopilot and they didn't have to think about that. But now every single consensus or every BOS cutoff point is extremely important to make sure that they're not missing out on allocation.
Sure. And Inga?
I think it's also really understanding kind of from an OEM perspective as they are thinking about car flow, kind of what is the inventory level and what is the velocity at different dealers for different trims and make model configurations in different markets, and kind of what is the competitive context, because kind of different OEMs, depending on what is the structure, on how much the core vehicle assembly versus powertrain components versus electronic components deep into the supply chain get impacted by tariffs, it ultimately impacts the price positioning in retail. And so I think there's also, in addition to allocation, the real questions that OEMs are thinking about from an incentive perspective, how do I address that lever to make a product competitive in the market context it plays in?
Yeah, that's a great point, and we're going to get into pricing in just a minute. I had one, question on clarity about tariffs. Don, do dealers understand? Do they know which models on their lots face a tariff and which do not?
I think the general answer is yes. The danger in the industry is to make sure that we ought to be very open with customers and express and show them which cars are actually subject to tariffs and additional fees versus those that may not be as we speak. I think the average customer, and this has been my experience my entire career, if you are honest and open with them about what we're dealing with, I think most of them recognize the need for you to make a profit and the need for them, more importantly, to have a great buying experience. So I think the dealers that are beginning to now show them and say, look, here is a car that is indeed subject to a tariff, or we're not quite hit with it yet. And so whatever the dealers do, I think they've got to make sure that they're disclosing totally with the consumers, but more importantly is don't over-represent tariffs on vehicles that in fact do not exist. Don't imply that everything is subject to when in fact they are not. And I think the customers expect that honesty and that integrity, and then in doing so, they'll be very happy and willing to buy that vehicle, even though there may be a tariff built in because it is legitimate and legal.
Sure.
And Hannah, I agree with what Don said. I will tell you, though, there is no transparency into the magnitude of the tariffs on models. For example, in the Chevrolet lineup, we know what's built in Korea, we know what's built in Mexico, but other than OEM price increases that we've seen on Ford, for example, on a handful of vehicles, there is no visibility whatsoever as to what the impact is of the OEM. It's a deep secret, and my friends on the OEM side say it's very difficult to compute because of all the parts movement across borders, and it's not just where the vehicle's assembled, obviously.
Yeah, that's a great point. So how do you handle that at the dealership level? What is your approach with customers who have questions about price increases?
We basically share what we know. And I think Don's point was have full transparency into what we do know. But to be very candid, we know very little. Mm-hmm. And the products we have on ground have not yet been impacted by tariffs, but we do know what's coming in will be impacted. And the other place we're seeing it is in parts. For the first time, we saw some fairly significant parts pricing increases in the month of May, which were abnormal.
Mm. Okay, yeah, we'll get to parts too. That's a great point. Overall, Brian, does Cars have a projection of how the tariffs will affect vehicle pricing at an industry level?
Well, we're looking at it on a make by make, because obviously some makes are affected more than others, and some are affected 100%, and some are affected 0%. But we haven't, that I've seen from other sources, an impact of $3,700 per vehicle. But I think that it's very important not to paint a broad brush. Mm-hmm. And I think that it's important to know which ones are and which ones aren't. The ones that are not affected or allegedly not affected, because, as Mike said, there's not a lot of clarity around that currently. But when you figure out which ones are, I think it's very important for dealers not to take their foot off the accelerator on the vehicles that don't have a tariff and try to treat them all under a blanket policy. Some you should get more aggressive on. Some, obviously, you should make sure you're maximizing the profit because the turn rate's not going to be there.
Inga.
Hannah, I might make one other comment
Sure.
on that, on the pricing, particularly when we finally see this coming in. The tendency sometimes, as a former young manager in a dealership long ago, is the boss says we got to sell cars, so we're going to go out and sell cars. And we have an opportunity to make some additional gross by saying all these cars are subject to these various tariff amounts, if you will. And I need to remind dealers that there are federal laws that will prohibit that if, in fact, the tariffs don't apply. There are state laws. And so we need to remind our young managers that run these dealerships and handling the desk and so forth, that when we actually start seeing this stuff implemented in the sales side of it, in terms of new vehicles, rather, we need to be very, very careful that we only represent that which is actual. And I think, again, customers don't mind paying that which is actual because they know that we, as entrepreneurs that sell cars for a living, this is not something we brought on them. this was done at a much higher level.
Yeah, great point.
Yeah, and I think that, Don, to your point, there was a bit of a dangerous precedent created with the sales addendums during COVID. And so I think as dealers are looking to build trust with consumers and really get the consumer excited to engage with the dealer, that kind of transparency and not kind of using it as a land grab is really important. I also think, Mike, what you said on parts pricing is really critical, because a lot of the dealers we have worked with have really leaned into fixed ops as one of the big profit drivers as they're thinking about 25, 26. And so the part inflation that's really kind of throwing off the 50-50 split between parts and labor, and how that gets articulated to the customer is a really important element, because it hits the US consumer as we're seeing inflation in a lot of different paces. And so that inflation in the core service component and the impact it has on the ownership experience is also something that we see a lot of dealers really wrestling with, and how to kind of communicate this to their customers and walk them through some of the new charges.
Inga, I'll stick with you. How might tariffs impact sales this weekend? Memorial Day, it's always a big weekend for dealers. Will it be again this year, or what sort of changes might we see because of tariffs, if any?
I mean, we have seen a significant pull ahead in late March and early April. Yeah, where we have seen the biggest year-over-year move since 2021, where people really got out into the dealership, bought cars, and really tried to leapfrog tariffs. And that also collided with some of the tax refunds. I think there are still consumers who are sitting on the sidelines that are looking for a deal. But given the level of uncertainty that we have in the market with UK's tariff, now we have a deal. Yeah, I think it's hard, as I think Don was saying it earlier in the call, for the dealer to understand how this breaks down. For a customer who doesn't even think about it on a daily basis, I think for the dealers who go out with a strong message on this is inventory, this is not impacted by tariffs, this is kind of a customer I move to action on a long weekend by really building value and understanding the needs of the customer, I think you still have some good movement. But I think we need to acknowledge that we took some air out with everything that we pulled ahead into March and April.
John,
I think
if I
that's
can make
very.
Go ahead, Mike.
Go ahead, Dan. I think it's very well said, Inga, and certainly we saw a huge surge at the end of March, and we thought we were the smartest we've ever been in our careers. And from mid-April on, it's been very choppy. It's not been bad, but it's been very inconsistent. And I think as you look at a holiday weekend, which is normally a great selling weekend, like Memorial Day, you're not going to see aggressive incentives. I don't think you'll see aggressive advertising. I think everybody's being quite cost conscious at the OEM level, and appropriately so. So I don't anticipate a big spike. I think it'll be a good sales day, but not a great sales day. Weekend, rather.
John, the comment I was going to make, I think, though, those of us in the business that are selling cars like Mike and so forth, at the end of the day, right now we're in this unique history in our country in that we don't necessarily trust the press and all that's coming out of the press these days. And it's unfortunate or fortunate, it's maybe a little bit of all the above. And I'm not sure consumers understand what they read about tariffs. Certainly dealers even have some difficulty understanding what that is or is not. So I think the key, and I don't want to downplay this, but the reality is if we just be motivated and excited about it's Memorial Day weekend, it's also to honor those people who died in harm's way to serve this great nation. But it's a great time to buy a car. We're excited about it. We've got inventory. I think we can't allow ourselves. And then as we watch the White House, this is not being political, but as you watch what they're doing in the matter of hours, they've done some things even this early morning this morning, and then some votes, what happened today that affect our industry. The reality is there's a lot of optimism out there that even these tariffs, though they hurt as we speak, but long-term wise, no one believes that they're going to be around. It's a tool being used by an individual, a president that many of us either like or dislike, but the reality is he's using that tool. And so I think at the end of the day, we have every reason to be optimistic, be aware of, be prepared for, and think about, but remain motivated, because it's still a great time to buy a car in the United States of America.
All right. So about that dealer attitude. And I will say, we know that tariffs are confusing and hard to keep track of, but you can trust Automotive News. Please follow our coverage and we'll answer your tariff questions.
Amen, sister. Thank you for saying that.
I also want to remind the audience to put your questions in the comments and we will ask them live. So the average monthly payment on a new vehicle was more than $740 in April. That's according to Edmunds. We're assuming the price for some models will go up even more. We've already seen it play out. Can consumers absorb those extra costs, or will they send them to either the used vehicle market or on the sidelines altogether? Brian, you want to start us on this one?
Sure. So we see the fastest growing segment on cars.com right now between 35,000 and 49,000. It's up 17% at the moment. And that's on new vehicles. That's because the average used vehicle price is getting pushed up from a retail standpoint, especially when you go sub 35 and then even more 30 and then 25. And it seems like very quickly $35,000 will be the new 25,000, which is just a few years after 15,000 was the normal, target of where you wanted to be on the average cost of sale. But I would say that from a pricing standpoint, I saw, from what happened in COVID, I kept on thinking that it was going to slow down, but it hasn't yet. And I think that a lot of that has to do the success of the dealer or the lack of success in the scenario you're presenting is how good are they at sourcing trades from consumers. The average consumer, I guess 70% is the number of transactions that should have a trade. However, it's like 35% new and used is what the average is. So what I see as I go around the country is the dealers that are doing a really good job of sourcing trades are doing a very good job of trading their clients out, and the payment impact is not as severe as the ones that don't have a trade attached to it. So I don't know if it's the direct answer, but I would say that consumer sourced acquisitions is the key to that.
I don't disagree with that, but I will tell you the consumer's under enormous pressure. And when I visit our stores now, the first place I go is to the finance department and ask, what are people saying? And people are looking to reduce their payments. And they're encountering negative equity, reduced investment accounts in their 401k, and more expensive products and higher interest rates. There's a whole series of things that are going against the consumer. And I'm an optimist, just as Don is and Brian is and Inga. We're all optimists. But the reality of it is people have to make those payments and they want less payments. So back to your question, yes, I think more people are going to go to used. Certainly people are going to lower content. We're turning less expensive product in new and used quite quickly. More expensive product is under a tremendous amount of pressure.
Michael, stick
And
with
I
you for
think
a
also
second.
when you
Go
look
ahead.
at the health of the existing auto loan portfolio, I think in January, 6.6% of subprime borrowers were more than 60 days past due. Delinquency rates are around 5%. So it's like just bumping up the monthly payment. Even you might be able to put the customer into that car in the dealership, doesn't actually mean that the customer can keep up with those rates. And so I think while we haven't yet seen lender actions to really pull back out of auto lending, if you keep pushing up payments, the nervousness of lenders to underwrite some, especially the subprime part of the portfolio, will become much more of a concern. And ultimately, it's really critical for dealers that they have a strong financing partner by their side. And the banks are only willing to go there, and the credit unions are only willing to go there if those loans perform. And so I think that's also an increasing concern. It's not just, can I get the customer into the car, but can the customer afford the car on an ongoing basis, especially if it also gets more important to maintain that car because of parts pricing.
If I could make one additional comment as it pertains to tariffs on this subject, with tariffs raising the price of vehicles. I've had the pleasure of working around legislators for a long, long time on behalf of the Virginia auto dealers. Ladies and gentlemen, we need to reach out to all of our legislators nationwide and talk about our fears about payments. And the fact of the matter is that tariffs are going to raise those payments. And no matter how optimistic and positive that all of us on this call are, that is the one issue that we have no control. The answer is not what Jim Farley says. Let's go to 7-year financing or 8-year financing. People will be upside down forever. We'll not be able to trade them out. It's a quick fix, and we're all going to feel good about ourselves with that happening. But the reality is we're then going to see our SAR go way down in terms of sales. It is a major problem, and it is the one thing that does keep me awake at night thinking about what can we do. Leasing has got to be part of that. Some states like Virginia don't do well in leasing. We've got to change that mentality. The rising of payments is a bigger deal to me than tariffs, but tariffs, when in effect, only raise those payments, as we've talked about. So I have deep concern, and the answer is not longer-term financing. For you young people out there, that is dangerous, and you will learn a sorry lesson or a sad lesson if we think that is our answer. It is not the answer. People will not be able to trade out because of being negative equity for so long.
So, Don, then what is the answer? I mean, obviously, easing the tariffs could help, but what else?
Well, again, as I said, in Virginia, we've got to make some changes in some of our laws here to make leasing more attractive, more viable for consumers. The fact is that OEMs just, coming up with a price, as Mike can attest to, our percentages of what we make today based on the price, it's people are astounded how little bit of money we make on these very expensive vehicles. But the OEMs keep going up in price. And part of it is, frankly, that their costs are getting higher and higher and higher. Some of that is the fact we're having to buy stuff overseas. We've got labor costs that are difficult. Frankly, if we're going to address tariffs and we want to change that and have manufactured vehicles in the United States, great. Then we've got to look at labor costs and insurance costs and things of that nature that all affect the price of vehicles. And at the end of the day, we are not going to keep America moving with selling cars and trucks, new and used, if our payments are going to be as high as we're talking today at $700-800 a month for average cars. We're not talking super expensive anymore. So we've got to be aggressive. We've got to think about it. We've got folks like the banks probably like it, the interest rates, the insurance companies make on service contracts. They get paid out over a longer period of time. Those folks all benefit. But those of us that are out here moving iron day in and day out of our life are not going to benefit by longer terms on cars and trucks. And Mike, I forgive me, but please chime in on this one because you're that guy. You're out there doing this stuff.
I think the pressure's everywhere, and we'll figure it out. It might be a choppy summer, but over time we'll figure all this out. And I think the government will respond. No one really knows what the president's going to do on a day-to-day basis, but long-term, he needs a healthy economy. And, high tariffs are not going to create a healthy economy. The time it would take to shift more production to this country is really, really outrageous. And you look at the capacity of the U.S. plants. The U.S. plants are running about 80% capacity, but to retool those and to get the parts and the distribution and the logistics into the U.S. is not going to happen quickly. So we're going to have to ride through this. And I think all of us on this call would agree this industry has been very resilient and is going to continue to need to be resilient. On a tactical basis, we're shifting and aggressively trying to buy more used product. We're working really hard to expand our service capabilities. And, there's things we can do. There's things that are not in our control. There's things that are in our control. And we are totally focused on those things that are in our control.
Okay. We have a question from the audience. Inga, maybe you can help answer this one. The person is wondering about tariff implications for finance companies. We talked about loan terms and rates. So what are you seeing anything specific there for the captives or the bank auto lenders?
Yeah, so it typically has a couple of different effects. Yeah, so first of all, of course, if new cars get more expensive, we know there's a lift in used cars, which is typically good for the residual value of the financing portfolio that you've underwritten. Because if I underwrote down and I kind of assume that I get the car back right now, it should be worth $25,000 because new car prices up, that car might be worth $27. So in those instances where the customer is delinquent and I have to repossess the vehicle, which nobody likes to do, but is an inevitable part of auto lending, I'm in a better position on this portfolio. And so kind of when people look at the health of their portfolio and the mark to market, it provides kind of a near-term benefit. Now, with inflation up and kind of consumer confidence, I think as we've all talking about, not bad, but just a bit shaky. And this uncertainty kind of making people think about the payment on the house versus the payment on the car versus their credit card debt and other obligations, which have also grown quite significant now that there's no more student loan forgiveness. I think if lenders are looking at the entire portfolio of their customers across student loans, housing, their car loans, that's when we see a little bit more uncertainty and a little bit less comfort of underwriting kind of deeper into the credit portfolio. And so it's not necessarily tariff per se, but it's the tariff combined with the uncertainty combined with the health of the consumer. I think there are definitely some dealers who are pushing their captives to get comfortable to go deeper into the credit spectrum, especially as some of the traditional lenders might be a bit worried. But I think we all know that captives historically have kind of only gone to a certain depth in the credit portfolio. And we, at least as of now, don't see the OEMs as part of incentives or the captives as part of the engagement with the sales organization of the OEMs being comfortable to go deeper into the credit spectrum. And so as things like student loan forgiveness pull back, there is a risk that some of the customers will step into lower FICO scores and that they lose some of the ability to kind of fund vehicles at the same interest rates that they have historically done. And so I think watching closely for the near and subprime segments and kind of how you engage with those customers and maybe explore use, maybe explore some leasing options or other alternatives, I think is something that we'll kind of continue to see. And then kind of the lenders being quite careful from a mark-to-market perspective, because I think we all also agree that there's not infinite upside in used cars. So if you look at the Manheim used car index and you look where that was pre-COVID and where we are now, we are still significantly above. And with some of the recent additional step-ups during the tariff uncertainty, I think we're getting pretty close to where a cap can be on used cars.
Hannah, can I add, I think that one of the fears that we have is that if inflation spikes, interest rates could go up, not down. And I sit on a large nonprofits investment portfolio, and I met with the chief investment officer the other day, and his concern is equities are going to be under pressure, bonds are going to be under pressure if interest rates move up, and it's going to put a lot of pressure on the lenders. So there's pressure on all sides. I mean, I think if the president's plan works perfectly, possibly rates could go down, but tariffs are going to increase costs and put more pressure on the consumer. And I think potential rate increases could be the storm that really hurts the industry. I'm not predicting that's going to happen, but I think it's highly probable that if the tariffs continue for an extended period of time and there's not deals cut, that could be one of the ramifications.
Yeah, it definitely highlights the complexity and, to an extent, the fragility of the industry. And I know we mentioned parts early on. We want to get back to that. John, do you have a question on parts?
Yeah, Mike, maybe sticking with you, could you walk us through how tariffs might impact over-the-counter part sales at dealerships, both in the short term and maybe over the long term as well?
John, I don't believe that they're going to impact sales. When you need a part, you need a part. It's certainly going to have an affordability problem. But as I mentioned earlier, and I surveyed all of our parts managers last night, and typically parts prices go up 1% or 2% twice a year. They're kind of on a normal cadence. These increases came in mid-month in May by one OEM specifically that range in the 3 to 4%. And what's interesting is the higher increases were on body parts, and I have no logical explanation of those. I don't think they're coming across many of the borders. So I don't necessarily understand how they got there. And when the price increases came, they came in kind of a normal flow, not in terms of cadence, but the communication was a normal flow, and it didn't highlight tariffs. Everybody seems to be worried about calling out price increases that come from tariffs. But back to your question, I don't think it impacts demand near term. Affordability and service is a big concern. Labor costs are up, parts costs are up, but our customers, we call them guests, our guests have to get their cars fixed if they don't replace the vehicle.
And what can dealers do to, prepare, for any increases in prices, whether from tariffs, labor, et cetera? Don, maybe we can start with you.
One of the things I love about Mike and his peers nationwide is they are the best at cutting expenses and figuring out how to weather a tough storm, if in fact that tough storm is going to hit. Now, again, having said that, it's a repetitive message during this interview today, and that is that, but dealers are eternal optimists and don't think in those terms, but when they have to make the cuts. By the way, that's why I love the franchise system. The manufacturers, the OEMs, struggle with that kind of mentality. Car dealers are champions for dealing with good times and bad times. Sell your cars through a franchise system, Mr. OEM, and you're going to see how great these car dealers can deal with the worst of times. Many of the people that with the OEMs are younger. They don't understand what dealers have been through. And so at the end of the day, I know that dealers will make whatever cut they have to make and do whatever needs to be done. And I know many dealers during COVID actually continued to pay people early on when we were closed initially and said, hey, we've got the money, the resources. These are our associates. They're part of our teams. We're going to pay them. So dealers will take care of and do what is right at the end of the day, but they can deal with an ever-changing economy if and when it ever changes again. And it will, it always has, but we will weather the tide. And that's what makes our franchise system so strong.
Okay, we're running out of time, but we do have a few more questions. Are the four of you okay to stay for a couple more minutes?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, thank you.
Happy to.
So we talked earlier about the variations in tariffs. So the UK paying 10% on vehicles and imports on vehicles from other countries paying 25%. How do those variations impact you at the dealer level? Do they, and how should dealers with multiple stores selling brands with different tariff exposures be thinking about their businesses? Brian, would you like to start?
Yes, I can give you a personal example.
Sure.
I just bought a tire for my wife that I bought in January, and she had a nail in it 2 weeks ago. And the price on that particular tire, which is made overseas, increased 25%. So I think that using technology, like an AccuTrade or something like that, to be able to, itemize what is the difference in a windshield that's produced by a, company like Ineos that's built in France, or somebody that's less subjective. In some cases, we'll see that there's 30, 40% impact. And when dealers are appraising vehicles, for instance, making sure that reconditioning estimate, not just using a flat $2,000 because that's what the average is. What I see the most successful dealers doing is looking at the difference between a 2022 windshield that doesn't have, let's say, ADAS, the safety systems, versus a 2024. And they don't realize that those are double the price of a windshield anyway. But if you don't, just as much volatility as we have with used car values these days, if you don't have technology that keeps up with the used car reconditioning values, because I would say it's even more volatile depending on where the parts are produced or what part, if it's a JLR, Audi, Porsche, something like that, that's going to be more effective. It's an unfair pendulum swing. And I would say that they definitely need to be top of mind and treat their used car department like they treat their F&I department. 100% of the time, the same way, 100% of the time presenting a menu to 100% of the customers.
Brian, maybe sticking with you.
For consistency.
Yeah, how are tariffs going to impact dealership buy sell, the M&A market for dealerships? What are we seeing already, and what are you anticipating?
Oh, for me?
Yeah.
Actually, I've talked to some dealers out there that are in the middle. I know that, I'm not going to talk about specifics, but there's a few dealers that have walked away from opportunities just due to the uncertainty, depending on the franchises. And there's some that where it accelerated the buy sell here recently in the last, 2 to 3 weeks. But I would say that it's definitely going to separate and this is just my perspective. Dealers that are better at used vehicles, retailing used vehicles and service, fixed operations are going to be the ones that lean into that, because they're not going to be as effective, and they know that those are the controllables that they can still move forward with. The ones that are going to rely on new cars as a higher percentage of the revenue, as a percentage of the total dealership revenue, those are the ones that are probably going to be more willing to pull back and hesitate until things, stabilize.
John, I live in that world as we're always looking at deals and looking at opportunities. And I would tell you that our view is not about what's happening today in automotive and whether I should offer a 4 times or a 5 times or an 8-time multiple. I think it's really more a concern about the macro economy. And if the country runs with huge deficits, budget deficits, I think there's no question we're going to be in for high inflation, which is a redundant comment from me, and a tougher time ahead. So my concern is less than what's going to happen in the next 2 or 3 months with that store, and more on how the consumer is going to be impacted and what the macros are going to be.
Okay, great point. All right, we have time for one more question, so I'll ask each of you to answer this one. You've made it clear that dealers are optimists, they're resourceful, but are they in crisis mode right now? Are they even preparing for a recession? And let's go around. Inga, would you like to start?
Yes, so I think most of the dealers we work with, they always look at a range of scenarios. Yeah, and kind of like there's of course we continue to be in a prolonged debate about trade with a lot of high tariffs that will impact new car prices, new car demand, overall affordability of everything, significant inflation. We can't really lower interest rates given the environment we're in, which continues to depress affordability. And so in that case, how do I pull back on expenses? How do I think about kind of like how much allocation do I take from the OEM? How aggressive am I in used cars? To Brian's point, what level do I recondition to? Because it's like there's the nice things on, do I paint the side? Do I paint the panel? Do I puff out the scratch? And then kind of what is a more resilient macro environment and what are the actions I take there? And I feel most of the dealers that I work with through a lot of the COVID uncertainty and even the OEMs have really built kind of an arsenal of tools on what do I do on different side of the business, on the fixed side, on kind of the variable side, on what do I do? How do I incentivize my F&I team, my business managers to kind of work with the salespeople? We also see a real focus on re-engaging with the existing customer base to cultivate both fixed ops opportunities, but to also get ahead of managing equity positions in vehicles. And so we see kind of that dealers that also take a through cycle view on creating a strong customer experience and building value for the customer tend to be better at kind of weathering these storms. But yes, I think most of the dealers are also ready, if this continues to deteriorate, to take some pretty assertive cost action in their own business to kind of protect the core of the business.
Okay, Brian, let's go to you.
So it's an interesting question. As I'm processing this, as I travel around the country, it depends on where I'm at geographically, and also which brand as to what the response to that question would be. As I'm thinking about it anecdotally, of if I'm asking those dealers, there's some that are very pessimistic, and then there's some that are probably too optimistic. But I would say that the interesting thing from my perspective, not being in retail anymore, but looking at it from the outside looking in, is the dealers that I see, even with the least desirable franchises, that are finding a way to win. They don't engage in the debate about whether we should have tariffs or not have tariffs. They're just trying to interpret it and figure out where are the opportunities that my competitors don't see, and how can I maximize this within my own brand to gain market share when everybody else might be, risk averse at the moment.
Okay, Mike, over to you.
Well, I think for our perspective is not what's going to happen a year from now. It's what's going to happen this summer with dramatically reduced new vehicle supply. So we had a meeting with our top leadership this morning and going to have another one next week to look at the variable expense side and what we can control. What are our outside services look like? What are our policy costs? What are our marketing costs? What's in our control? And we're beginning to drive our costs down and shift our focus into used acquisition. And it's really easy to say that, and Brian knows better than anybody. It's really difficult to acquire used cars. There's intense competition from the Publix, from CarMax, from Carvana, from everyone. And we were really successful in the pandemic doing it, but we were successful, frankly, because the used car values went so high and it was kind of easy. It's not easy anymore. So our focus is shifted to controlling what we can control on our variable expenses, and whether it's in marketing or in our store actions, really moving toward an aggressive used car acquisition strategy.
Okay, and Don?
Having the blessing of worked in this industry for 47 years, I will tell you this without a shadow of doubt, and that is that we've always sold cars no matter what is going on. And if with the right attitude, no matter what is happening, whether it's, high inflation or recession, there are cars still being sold and serviced in the various states throughout the nation. I've got a little over 60,000 people that work in the auto industry in Virginia. There's probably 1,000 that spend hours thinking about the things we're talking about today. There's 59,000 that get up every morning getting ready to go to the dealership, to work hard, to turn a wrench, to do what they've got to do, or to make money selling a used car, or an F&I, or getting a car prepped and so forth. And those are the people we've got to keep motivated and excited. Let the 1,000 focus on what we need to be doing long-term wise. But the other 59,000, using Virginia as an example, need to keep their game face on, because we'll always sell cars. The question is, what's unique about your operation? Why do I want to come to your store versus somebody else's store? And if you can't give me a reason for that, you don't deserve the business. Give me a reason and I'll come buy cars from you.
Okay, some good thoughts to end on. Thank you all very much. Keep following autonews.com for the latest on tariffs, and we hope to see you in September at Automotive News Congress, where you'll hear more great conversations like this one. Confirmed keynote speakers include General Motors Chair and CEO Mary Barra and Hyundai Motor Group Executive Chair Yusin Chung. You can buy your tickets at autonewsevents.com. Thanks to Cars Commerce for supporting this session, and thank you to our Congress Conversations production team, Rudy Shork, Dean Storm, Jake Neer, and Tiara Riddick. And another thank you to our panelists, Mike Maroone, Don Hall, Inga Maurer, and Brian Kramer. What a great conversation. And thanks to the audience for tuning in. For John Irwin and the rest of the Automotive News team, I'm Hannah Lutz. See you next time.